Camera. All right, we are here with another World Club of the Fortnight. This week we are talking about Boca Juniors. Very special guest, Gabriel from the Boca in English podcast and the Boca in English Twitter. Gabriel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, my friend. How's everyone? Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Very glad to have you. I am doing well. How about yourself, Evan?
I'm doing good. Good. It's sunny where I'm at, which is a break in the weather since it's acted like it's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights.
So you guys are both on the East Coast. Is it sunny further north in New York, Gabriel?
It is actually. It's not. I mean, It's been really, really cold the past couple of weeks. It hasn't been too bad the past few days, but it is sunny right now, which is good.
And it's sunny here in Minneapolis as well. And I think we're kind of on our last day of winter here today. Just below freezing here still. So let's get into talking about Boca. So why are you a fan of Boca, Gabriel?
Family, pretty much. My parents were born in Argentina. My grandparents were born in Argentina. Ancestors all live and lived in Argentina. I have a lot of family over there. And I even lived there when I was a little kid. And most of my family are Boca Juniors fans. And, I inherited that from my father and his father, great-grandparents and all that. So, yeah.
Awesome. So if somebody was going to, they're just getting the Argentinian football right now, what would you say would be a reason for them to pick Boca? I mean, maybe we'll get into this a little more with the other questions, but what's some of the great things about Boca?
If I could really describe it in one word, I would really say passion. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen matches or videos of the fans in the stadium. It's just the passion is incredible. And overall in Argentina, throughout all the clubs, the passion is just phenomenal and really breathtaking. But the thing that distinguishes Boca amongst, the other clubs is that Boca is really the working class team. Sort of, I mean, it doesn't really represent it. It's not really represented like that, in these days. But Boca is really the poor man's team, I guess you could say, the working class back 100 years ago. So the passion stems from that, I would say. And that's why I would say, that's what basically describes Boca Juniors.
Yeah, it's hard in the modern game to be a true working class team and really be in the first division of any country. Yeah. So, that's the way it is. So we always like to talk about the founding of clubs. Does Boca have an interesting founding story? I know they have some interesting stories in their history. So if you want to tell some of those too, then now's a great time to do that.
Yeah, I know so many. If I were to keep this nice and simple, one of the it was basically founded by, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 4 or 5 brothers in the neighborhood of La Boca. That's one thing I actually want to mention. Most clubs, even in the MLS or in Europe, they're based in cities like Real Madrid, Barcelona. Those are all cities. In Argentina, clubs stem from neighborhoods, and the neighborhood that Boca comes from is the neighborhood of La Boca. So that's really where the team was founded. It was 4 brothers. They decided to start up a soccer club after a lot of immigration occurred from Ireland, from England into Argentina. There was teams, stemming, and like everybody, they wanted to jump in on this madness, this new sport, and they wanted to create a soccer club. And one of the stories I like the best is actually Boca's original colors were black and white stripes, kind of like Juventus. And there was another team with similar colors, and Boca actually played a match against that team to see who could keep those colors, and Boca lost. That's how the story goes. That's what the legend tells. So, the founders were kind of like, what do we do? So in La Boca, there's sort of a river, a dock where a lot of ships sail through, and they said, well, let's go to the dock, and the next ship that comes in, we're just going to take the colors of that ship. And sure enough, it was a Swedish ship with the Swedish flag, and that's where Boca's colors stem from, the blue and gold.
Okay, all of my Argentine, which is not a lot, but all of my Argentine friends in the U.S. are River fans. But I had to say this. I have never heard this Swedish story, and you can't see it because I'm wearing long sleeves, but I actually have a Swedish tattoo on my arm, lots of Swedish things going on in my life. And so I've never really followed Argentine league, but I might have to be like, sorry guys, I'm gonna have to go with Boca on this. So,
there you go. There you go.
So I had never heard that story of Boca losing and get the story, but there was a game for the neighborhood as well. Am I correct?
Yeah, a lot of people say that, the next story I'm going to tell, a lot of people don't really agree with it or say it's not true.
Okay.
The tale goes that this is before the professional era in Argentine football, of course, but Boca played a match against River Plate to stay in the neighborhood, and Boca won that match. So River ended up leaving, going to another neighborhood. I'm not too sure if that story is 100% true. I think River actually ended up leaving because economic costs of where they were based or something along those lines. But, a lot of people do say that, yeah, it was a match. It was the first Super Clásico between Boca and River Plate, and Boca ended up winning that match, and River ended up leaving to another neighborhood.
So that's apocryphal or not, that's certainly at least the story of a success. What about any other past successes or failures?
Let's go with failures. So. Most recently, the 2018 Libertadores Final, which was just a mess in my eyes. I mean, everything apart from the matches themselves, all the violence that went on with that match. I felt like it was a failure really for both clubs. And then the match itself, which we ended up losing. That's, I would say, our biggest loss in the club's history. But being Boca's right now back-to-back champions of Argentina. So considering that, I mean, it's not really that big of a loss, but most people would consider it, the biggest loss in the club's history. There's also an economic crisis that Boca went through in the mid-'80s after the departure of Diego Maradona from the club. The club almost was dissolved and ceased to exist in the mid-'80s. It was like 84, 85. The club couldn't really afford any sponsors. Ticket sales were at an all-time low. The players actually went out with painted numbers on their shirts because they couldn't afford to stamp them or whatever it is that they did back in the days. So in terms of failures, I would say the match itself from last December and that economic crisis in the 80s are two of the biggest failures for the club.
So I have two questions stemming from that. So back in the day, transfers were way different. When Maradona left, was that on a free, or was it just a weird country thing? Or, because now if a player like Maradona had left a club, you'd think that would be a time of economic prosperity for the club.
No, definitely. Maradona actually left Boca Juniors. It was on a transfer. I think it was for $10 million from Barcelona,
that's a lot.
Which is a lot of money for the 80s. But considering Boca also paid about $10 million to buy Maradona. So, Boca really didn't gain anything from the transfer itself. The neat thing about Maradona is that he actually played in Argentinos Juniors, the club that brought him up, for I think it was 4 or 5 years. And nowadays, you usually don't see that. If you see a young star nowadays, within 6 months, your European team just buys them instantly.
And my other question was, you had mentioned that they were back-to-back champions. And we can come back to the past successes and failures, but the league this season, is it completely gone, or I know they're off the pace a bit, or is there still some hope?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the weird thing about Argentinian football, or I would really say about South American football, is that the league leaders right now, Racing, they took advantage of them not playing any international football the past year, and Boca and River Plate actually did. So Boca and River Plate put all their focus towards the Copa Libertadores and sort of, played second-string teams throughout the league and dropped a lot of points in the process. And that's what Racing, took advantage, and it's looking like they're going to win the title. Mathematically, though, Boca isn't out. I think if Racing wins this weekend, then mathematically, I think we are out. But Boca really did, come back from. They closed a large gap from where we ended at the end of December.
Oh, and Copa Libertadores spots guaranteed or likely, or?
Yes, third place. Boca's in third place right now. The top 3 spots automatically qualify for the 2020 Libertadores group stages. The fourth spot plays the preliminary rounds. I think you play 2 or 3 rounds before you actually make it into the group stage. And a 5th spot is saved for the Copa Argentina winner, which is sort of like the Copa del Rey or the FA Cup in England. Similar structure.
Yes, so they have one of those locked up, or is that still
exactly? Yeah. Boca's in 3rd place right now, so we pretty much have that position locked up, which is great. That's automatically qualification to the group stages, which is always great for the club. I'm pretty sure if we win this weekend and 4th place River don't win, we automatically get that spot.
Well, from what I can see River and there's another team that looks like they're tied on points, so you might need both of them to lose technically. Although I haven't ever heard of this other club, so I'm assuming that they're not one of the main ones up there. It's Atletico Tucumán.
Yeah. River actually this past weekend beat them in their home. That's why they're tied in points.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you're right. They both Tucumán actually played one more game than River.
Oh, I see that now. Yeah, you're right. Yep. I had a question jumping in here because we were talking about successes. When we talk about successes, we normally try to talk about like if they have any prolonged failures in a club. And I noticed that they are one of like about 60 clubs in the world to have never been relegated. And I don't know how hard it is to be relegated in the Argentinian league. It looks like it doesn't even show us like how the relegation works. At least on this Wikipedia page. I don't know if like the top 3 drop or if it works like other leagues, but can you explain like how hard it is to be relegated and if they've ever been close to being relegated before?
Of course. So in a nutshell, yes, it is extremely hard to be relegated. You have to essentially perform bad for 2 to 3 years. The way that it's structured is what they call promedios, which are basically an average of games played and points achieved. So it's a separate standing, it's a separate table, and the bottom 3 from that table actually get relegated. So I haven't taken a look at that table in God knows how long, essentially, because I really don't have to. But if I'm not mistaken, Boca is first because, again, we are back-to-back champions, so we're first on that table, which also goes to show, how bad River Plate did things back in 2011. They had a couple of campaigns, a couple of seasons where they performed really, really bad, and that's exactly what you have to do in order to be relegated.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if how many other countries do that, but it's a multi-year relegation process.
Exactly. So there are teams relegated every year, and there are teams from 2nd division that go up every year. But the reason they do that, it's mostly to benefit the smaller clubs. Let me give you an example. I don't know if you guys remember the 2017 Libertadores Final. It was played between Grêmio of Brazil, pretty big team in Brazil, and against Lanús of Argentina. Lanús is a very, very small club. So with this relegation structure, they had the luxury of sacrificing the league and putting all their focus onto the Libertadores, and they ended up making it to the final, and they're a very, very small team in Argentina. And they weren't relegated because they did pretty poorly in the league that year. So that's the structure. That's basically why. It's sort of to give the smaller clubs a cushion.
It gives them a few years in the Premier in the top division. Gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah. That year they made it to Libertadores Final, and I think out of that season was structured pretty bad or really weird. I think out of 12 games played, they only achieved 9 points, which is pretty bad. But they again, all their focus was on the international competition.
It's a pure point system. The 3 wins or 3 points for a win and 1 for a draw for the relegation. Okay, so
exactly.
not like the coefficient for like I know like the European Champions League and all they have like a coefficient and stuff. So it's nothing like that. I just wanted to clarify that for anybody that was listening. So it's not super complicated, really. It's just
it's just years, it's literally just a percentage of points achieved versus possible points. And you win a match, you get 3 points. You draw, you get a point. You lose 0, of course, just like anywhere else.
So I want to jump back into the past successes. Boca has been a pretty successful club. I mean, we've talked a little bit about some of the recent success. What about their historic, both domestic and international success?
Yeah, let me read you some numbers. I actually have them straight on my bio. So Boca has achieved 67 titles over the course of their history, which is the most out of any Argentine club. 22 of those titles are international. It's really 18 are recognized by FIFA, 4 are recognized by Argentina and Uruguay. Those are 4 trophies that were played in like the 30s and 40s. 33 league title, 12 national titles. The national titles consist of the Copa Argentina, like I said before, similar to the FA Cup and Copa del Rey of Spain. So yeah, in terms of titles, Boca is the most successful club in Argentina. In terms of international titles, Boca is the most successful club in Argentina. I would say the most successful, the biggest achievement of the club was certainly the Intercontinental Cup in 2000, where Boca defeated Real Madrid 2-1. Yeah.
That was the precursor to what is now the Club World Cup for people that
exactly
aren't familiar with that history.
It was just one match, and it was played between the South American champion and the European champion, which is sort of what happened nowadays for the most part in the club.
For the most part, yeah. One year I know a Congolese team made it to the final, but yeah, other than that, yeah, it's usually South America.
This past Club World Cup, it was played between Real Madrid and Al Ain, I believe you pronounce the name, a club from the Middle East, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know where they're from, but yeah, so it's definitely been some other because that, yeah, if they were Egypt club, then that would be Africa. If they were one of the other further east clubs, then they would be an Asian club. But
exactly,
they're from the United Arab Emirates. Just
okay, yeah. Did they host it?
Yes, they did.
Okay, that's what I thought. So, sorry, getting a little off topic there. Yeah, so back-to-back champions. The Libertadores this year. We talked about the league position. It's like off. The domestic years and the Libertadores years are a little off sync. Is that right?
It used to be. The Copa Libertadores was actually over the course of 6 months, and it was like that for about 8 to 9 years, I believe. But now they've stretched it. They've made it normal. At least in my opinion, it's over the course of a year. It actually just kicked off not too long ago. Boca is in Group G, and we're currently in first place with a draw and a win. So kicking things off good in the Libertadores this year so far.
This is just kind of an aside question, but do they seem to favor the Libertadores over the season every now and then, or do they always favor the league? Because that's always a discussion when it comes to like European sides. Like they seemingly can't focus on both, so they have to pick one to kind of play their main players with all the travel midweek. They have to maybe take it easy in the international competition, or vice versa. So what do they tend to do?
In Argentina, Boca is labeled as club win everything in a nutshell. So Boca really competes for absolutely everything, and the players are demanded by the fans to win absolutely everything. Above all else, yes, the Copa Libertadores. That's the biggest achievement, for the fans. It's what the fans enjoy the most. Libertadores nights at La Bombonera are absolutely phenomenal. If you ever get the chance to go to Argentina and watch a Boca game, I would suggest watching a Libertadores game because it's just a different atmosphere. It's what the fans really enjoy. In total, Boca has won 6 Copa Libertadores, which is second most. Independiente, another club of Argentina, having the most with 7. But yeah, Boca favors the Copa Libertadores over everything. Just like I said before, at the end of 2018, Boca fielded second-string teams in the league to win the Libertadores. But it doesn't mean that. I mean, the second-string team is expected to also perform in the league, when those players are given chances. But yeah, the priority over everything is the Copa Libertadores for sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't know if it was I wasn't quite sure like how the group structure worked, if it was like they wouldn't try their hardest until after the group stage? Because I know some teams try to be like, well, we'll field a weaker side for the group stage, thinking that we'll get through this, and then when we get to the knockout stages is when we'll play our hard team. But if they're win everything, I mean, that's what I like. I want my club to go for win as many games as possible.
Yeah, of course. The group stage is really the entire Copa Libertadores is really, it's a tough, I believe in my eyes, it's the toughest competition to win. I think, comparing it with the Champions League, you look into the Champions League, you can, with a fair guess, you can pretty much pick the two finalists out of 4 teams, I would say. In the Copa Libertadores, there's at least 10 to 12 teams, depending on the season, how everyone's performing, that have realistic chances of winning the competition. So let me give you an example. The first match that Boca played this year was against a team called Jorge Wilstermann. It's a Bolivian team. It's a pretty famous team in Bolivia. And Boca drew 0-0. It's a pretty – they don't compare to Boca in terms of, player quality and all that. But the reason, the draw was seen as a good result or not a bad result is because they played in such a high altitude, 2,600 meters above sea level, which – for those of you that have been in those altitudes, it's very difficult, especially if you're not used to it. Mm-hmm. So those are the things you kind of have to deal with in the Copa Libertadores, playing in high altitudes and stuff like that. So you can't really afford to field a second string team in the group stage because you might end up, crashing out.
There's a lot to unpack there, but probably will get us too off topic. There's so many successes that Boca has had. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we sort of move on to the next topic?
In terms of successes, well, like I mentioned before, the Libertadores is really a difficult competition to win. In the early 2000s, in the Carlos Bianchi era, that was our manager at the time. He's the most successful manager in Boca Juniors history. He won the Copa Libertadores with Boca in 2000, 2001, and 2003. 3 out of 4 years and back-to-back, which is unheard of. In Argentina, or really in South America, nobody wins the Libertadores back-to-back. Boca was the last team to achieve that in 2000 and 2001. And they also achieved it in the 70s and 78 and 77, actually. So those are pretty big achievements as well.
All right, so I'm going to get you started off on this next one. We're going to talk about some notable players. We already talked about one, Maradona, and then I've got Tevez and Riquelme. We'll let you talk about those first, and then I guess any other notable players that you would like to mention.
Of course. We can start off with Riquelme. He's my favorite player of all time. I was actually discussing this on the podcast with the guys yesterday. In a nutshell, I have never seen Riquelme play live in person before, unfortunately. And I've seen Lionel Messi play 5 times. And I told the guys on the podcast yesterday, I would give up those 5 times to see Riquelme play live or in person just once. That's how much love I have for this guy. He was the most detrimental player in Boca Juniors history, especially in the Copa Libertadores. Again, everything's tied to that competition. He is our all-time leading scorer in that competition. He was just a natural playmaker, a classic number 10, a player that you usually don't see nowadays. He was labeled as a very slow player, but with that slow pace, his mind was just ahead of the game. He saw passes, he saw runs that nobody really ever saw. In my opinion, he is the greatest player to ever play for Boca Juniors. And going into Carlos Tevez, he's actually probably the biggest youth product to come out of Boca Juniors. Riquelme was sort of formed in Boca. Most of his career, he was formed through Argentinos Juniors Youth Academy. Carlos Tevez is 100% Boca Juniors product. And, not only did he excel with Boca in international successes and league titles and all that, he also excelled in Europe. He has been captain for Argentina plenty of times. He excelled, with Manchester City, in Italy with Juventus, Manchester United. So he really has excelled everywhere he's played. Even at his time with West Ham United, where he saved them from relegation along with the rest of the team. He also played for a season in Brazil after leaving Boca Juniors. he excelled there too. So I would say Carlos Tevez is the biggest youth product in Boca history.
You got around to mention it, but when you started off with City, I was going to say, well, he did win Champions League at Man United, but yeah, he probably is more well known from his time at City internationally than I mean, everybody's going to play second fiddle to Ronaldo, so that is what it is. Anyway, Maradona was the other like big ones that I knew off the top of my head.
So Maradona, you would think that a player with one league title under his name isn't really, too remembered, but Maradona is just Maradona, considering his achievements with the national team and abroad, not too much with Barcelona. I don't think he actually won anything with Barcelona, but mostly his achievements with Napoli and being labeled as, one of the greatest players of all time. That's why he's so loved at Boca. He only achieved one title. That was back in 1981. Where, that was also one of the most famous jerseys of all time. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that jersey, that edition. I actually have it right here in front of me. This is the jersey they used, an Adidas jersey. I have been looking for that jersey for forever, and mostly because of Maradona, but it's almost impossible to find. And if you do find it, the seller usually wants a couple $1,000s. But yeah, Maradona is labeled as, one of the best players to ever play for Boca Juniors, of course.
So this is not totally off topic, but I learned recently that there is a podcast devoted completely to football kits. So really? If you're a kit man, if you're interested, I can, I don't remember the name of it, but yeah, they just talk about, they pick a jersey and like, they kind of talk about the history of the club and that particular jersey. Like,
that's very neat.
So it's interesting. Like, I didn't think it would be interesting, but it actually is.
Yeah, of course.
So any other, I mean, like tons of people have come out of Boca Juniors to play in Europe and, play for the Argentine national team. But is there anybody else that like really super deserves mention?
Of course, our top goal scorer of all time, Martín Palermo. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these names in Spanish. I also speak Spanish. And in English, I would pronounce it Martin Palermo, I guess.
No, go with the Spanish. Go with the Spanish.
Martín Palermo. So he has 256 goals, if I'm not mistaken, over the course of his Boca Juniors career. He played in Europe a short while with Villarreal, I think for a season, and ended up coming back to Boca Juniors. But he's up there with Riquelme and Maradona as, one of the most loved players of all time in Boca Juniors history. He's won dozens of league titles. I think he has 2 Copa Libertadores to his name. And most famously, he actually scored both goals against Real Madrid in that famous Intercontinental Cup.
Yeah, I was looking at a lot of these goal scorers. They played way in the past, except for him. I guess it's because back in the day they would spend more time along with their one club and not be shipped to Europe or somewhere else. Are there any more like recent players that maybe came up through Boca's youth system and maybe are in or scattered around Europe or somewhere else?
Yeah, there's dozens, of various mid-table teams. There's one player that plays for a mid-table team in Spain. If you let me just look him up real quick. But let me see. Just give me 1 second. I think he plays for Levante. Yeah, he plays for Levante. I forget his name, but he plays over there. Most famously, probably Leandro Paredes. That plays for PSG. He spent a short while at Roma and Zenit in Russia as well. Not too many other names. Like, Bentancur, of course. Rodrigo Bentancur, Uruguayan midfielder. He plays for Juventus alongside Cristiano Ronaldo. They're starting to come back to me. There's probably a couple more over there. But yeah, most notably, those are the most recent players. They don't have too much history or identification with Boca because, like you said before, as soon as they reach this peak or this potential, they're purchased. So they don't. Unfortunately, they're not able to win too much with the club.
Yeah. It's just, to me, that's kind of unfortunate the way the way it is these days. I often hear about people speak about the teams of old with the South American teams in Brazil and Argentina, and how like they'd have those players be around for a decade or two, and just how fun it was to watch them and get to know them and spend almost your life just praising them and just watching them day in and day out. You just don't get that anymore, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, really look at any club's history. Their most notable players, most historic players, they're in the early 2000s, 90s, 80s, 70s, and before that, where they spent a lot of time with their club. Mm-hmm. If you take a look at Carlos Tevez, for example, Juventus transferred him to Boca Juniors for a very small fee. So I guess it's sort of, the other side of things. We're sort of able to bring those players back without spending too much. European teams do allow that, since, we did bring them up and, raise them at the club and stuff like that. So you do see those things. But
you're also not a competition. I mean, at least not until the Club World Cup. So
Exactly. I do see in the near future things sort of getting even a bit, I guess you could say, even though, you have the biggest clubs in Europe absolutely splashing a ridiculous amount of money. I have noticed, especially with Boca, the release clauses, the buyout clauses of our players sort of, rising and growing. So that's sort of making European teams think, should we really go ahead and purchase this player? We're spending a lot more than we typically do for South American players. So things are sort of, I see them evening out a little bit.
Well, good. Doug, were you ready to move on to the next topic, or did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the derbies, unless you had any other players that you really felt like were worth mentioning.
Maybe another player, our coach that departed at the end of December, Guillermo Barros Esqueloto. You guys might know him for his time at Columbus Crew in the MLS. He also played a vital role in the early 2000s alongside Palermo and Riquelme. He played as, I guess you would say, a left winger or right winger. He played both sides, usually on the left, but he, was a huge part of Boca's success in the early 2000s.
Cool. So we already spoke about the derby with River, and we can talk about that a bit more if you want. But I wanted to first ask if there were any other big rivals. I mean, that one's like one of the biggest ones in the world. But are there any other local rivalries that are intense?
Yeah, in Argentina they have what they call the Big Five, which are Boca Juniors, River Plate, Racing Club, Independiente, and San Lorenzo. Those are the top 5 teams in Argentina. And anytime Boca plays any of those 4 teams, it's always considered a derby or a big match, or a match really to look forward to. But like you said, the match with River Plate sort of is above all else.
Did you? I mean, we already spoke about it a little bit. Some of the history there. Was there anything else that you'd like to say about the derby?
Yeah. So the derby, like I sort of touched on a little bit before. Boca, like I said, is a poor man's team, or the working class club, however you want to label it. River Plate is the complete opposite. They are the rich man's team, the rich man's club. And even if you take a look at the neighborhoods which they're based in, La Boca for Boca Juniors, I've been there twice. I was lucky enough to go to a couple games as well. It's very, it's poor. You can tell that the people are really, the working class part of, civilization of Argentina. The buildings really aren't kept up to date, sort of what we have here in the United States. And when I went to Argentina in 2016, the hotel that my parents booked was actually in the neighborhood called Núñez, which River Plate is from. And I didn't know that until I actually got to Argentina. And I sort of told my dad, like, what are you thinking? Why are we staying in this neighborhood? Because I'm sitting there walking around with the Boca Juniors jersey and wondering why everyone's looking at me so weird. And, so that's exactly why. But, that neighborhood is sort of black and white compared to La Boca. It's very well kept, very well maintained. You could tell that the rich part of society lives there. So that's where the rivalry really stems from. It's mostly culture. It has nothing to do with soccer itself. And then, of course, the game itself, you want to dive into that, it's just absolute madness. Plenty of yellow cards, red cards, pretty much always guaranteed. And yeah.
And they only play once a year. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I mean, again, the structure of Argentine football is really just crazy right now. They made a very bad mistake of having 30 teams in first division, which is really unheard of. And then they realized that was a big mistake. So they're sort of shrinking down back to, 20 teams in first division. So they have this format, or they're stuck in the middle where, they can't do a traditional European league where everybody plays 38 games because it's just too much with 26 teams that we currently have. It's way too many games. And they're sort of reverting back to short seasons. So they have 2 champions a year, something like that. So yeah, as of recently, Boca Juniors and River Plate have been playing, twice a year.
I say if you limit the amount of times they play, that probably even makes every game even that much more important. They only get to host them maybe once a year. Or once every 2 years. That's when they come to town, you're going to be ready for them.
Exactly. So this current season, for example, like I said, they're sort of stuck in this midway point of having too many teams, and so everybody plays everybody just once. And Boca already played River back in November, so that match is done. There are no Super Clásicos, Boca Juniors versus River Plate games for the rest of the year, as of now, unless they match up in the Copa Libertadores again, or they do match up in the Copa Argentina. But for now, there are no other matches this year, and they even refuse to play their typical preseason friendlies, how they usually do in January. So.
Yeah, a topic mostly for another day, but it's highly contrasted the way things used to be in Scotland, where they do. It's also a weird league where they do this split thing after everybody plays each other twice. But Celtic and Rangers, they'd play each other they could play 8 times a year if they met in the Scottish League Cup and the Scottish FA Cup, and then they both made it in the split, which they So it was a little bit ridiculous there for a while. But yeah, so we always like to end up the show asking guests if there's anything else that they would like to say. We sort of wrapped up our normal questions. So if there's anything that we missed that you'd like to say, then now's the time. Did I go silent? Did we lose him?
I hear you.
Did we lose you, Gabriel?
No, yeah, I'm here. I can hear you guys.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So I just asked if there was anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap things up.
No, I'd just like to thank you guys for having me on and just talk about, the club that I love and that I cover every day in the English language. So thank you both, guys. I really do appreciate it.
We were glad to have you.
Yeah, somebody who actually knows something for once. So.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, thank you again, Gabriel, for coming on the show, and thank everybody for watching the World Club of the Fortnight.